Good morning. Mornings with Meep. Today I want to talk about Thomas Sowell's Applied Economics. I'm going to read my review I just posted on Goodreads. For a fairly short book, Sowell packs in a lot, quite a bit like his sentence as paragraphs in his essays. What is refreshing about Sowell's work is quite accessible for those uneasy with equations and graphs, because there are none. And he uses a diversity of examples to illustrate the concepts that are in the books. And they're all real-life examples, not theoretical examples. Too often in these kinds of books, and this type of writing, it's very US-centric and very present-day centric. I had almost wanted to complain, I wanted an updated version of the book, and there is evidently a revised and enlarged edition of the book, but I'm not going to buy another one. I don't really need more examples. I bought this one in February 2005, not far after this was published in 2004. So obviously that was pre-financial crisis. So I was going to say, well, I would like some update on what happened with the financial crisis, and that would definitely go in the chapter on risk. I'll do a quick rundown of the chapters. So, given that some of the examples, since he's not just present-day focused, he often covers things over the last couple hundred years, especially since the development of the Industrial Revolution. But he also reaches back thousands of years, especially when he talks about the economics of slavery. In terms of course, slavery has existed as long as civilization has existed, as far as we know. But how slaves were treated, whether they could buy their freedom, whether your condition of slavery, well, how did you become a slave, that kind of thing. What were slaves used for? Some of them were kind of interesting in terms of slaves were kind of rented out at various times in history, which is kind of interesting. And then they would give their owners a cut of the proceeds. That sounds like certain kinds of working arrangements, huh? In any case, it's kind of petty to complain. I don't have even more recent examples from the book, but it's easy to add on to it. So my favorite aspects of the book is learning some history. Some of the history I already knew, but Sowell, of course, has really dug into certain aspects of history, and if you care about more of it, he definitely has an extensive sources list. The sources, and he goes through unsafe at any speed. Oh, yeah, the economics of slavery, free and unfree labor. How is prison labor used, all sorts of stuff. So I might go digging into that later for my own interest. One of the things I did, partly because I'm like, wait, where is Fiji? A lot of kind of the South Pacific, all of the Oceania, the islands and stuff, was like, okay, where's Malaysia versus Indonesia versus India? And one of the aspects that he goes on about is a great deal of Indian labor in Fiji, which was part of British colonial policy. Anyway, so you learn geography, you learn some histories, look up, but you don't need to have a lot of context. You need not have gotten his other book, which is Basic Economics, which introduces some of the major concepts in economics. And if you really want the allocation of scarce resources, which have alternative uses, drummed into your head, Basic Economics is where it's at. This, though, you can come into this. It helps to be an adult. It helps to have some real life experience so you understand how people actually behave. But this is kind of an intersection of how decision-making actually occurs, decision-making that has economic effects. A lot of this does have to do with politics, so politics versus economics. The subtitle is Thinking Beyond Stage 1, and so a lot of politics has been okay, we want this goal, therefore we will write a law this goal. The perfect example going on right now is the eviction moratorium. Well, a lot of us who have spare capital for whatever reason are rethinking. I never wanted to deal with rental properties, but I know a lot of people who do, as a passive source of income. And if it turns out that basically the government will commandeer your property to provide free housing for other people, that has an effect on who is going to own rental property in the future. Rental property will exist, but it might be more outfits like BlackRock versus individuals who own, say, 3 houses, versus BlackRock, which might have a portfolio of residential real estate across multiple countries. So, it will have effects in stage 2 once the pandemic is over. Just to take a look at rents going up, the rental property supply contracting, all sorts of things. If people feel like the government at any time will say, sorry, you can't evict people who aren't paying rent. Of course, the other aspect is some people might not be able to finance their rental properties. A lot of those properties are mortgaged, and so they may not be able to pay their mortgage loans. They get foreclosed upon, and of course the tenants will get evicted, and there can be multiple consequences. So it's going through the real life consequences of a lot of different policies, but also looking at the economics of stuff a lot of people don't generally want to think about. So I'm just going to read the names of the chapters. The first one is politics versus economics, then free and unfree labor. So this will get into stuff like, as I said, how slaves are used, but there's also prison labor. There's other kinds of labor. And of course, whether you're going to use human versus, say, machine to provide labor. Economics of medical care. Economics of housing. So I was just talking about eviction laws, risky business. So that's, of course, what I'm interested in. He gets into some of the aspects of insurance. Now, this is all at a very high level, and I know about all sorts of things about insurance that Professor Sowell obviously doesn't know about. That's okay, especially with regards to how reinsurance is used. There are certain tricky aspects. So he actually doesn't get into what I would call finance and financial regulation too much. There's a reason it exists. It does kind of need to exist. There have been consequences from it not existing. When it was the Wild West of insurance, there's limitations on how much of an exposure any person would go for, any company, to be able to build a very, ginormous company that has billions, hundreds of billions of dollars in reserves, which is backing insurance promises. They're not just sitting on the money. The whole point of that money is that we're expecting to have to pay it out as insurance companies. In any case, I think, and I'm just going to have to think about it some more. There are a variety of books out there that kind of get into this aspect of insurance, against the gods or against the odds. Some other ones, The Wisdom of Finance, I've mentioned before, is a good book. In any case, let's move on. Economics of Discrimination. And again, this is not solely U.S.-centric, but looks at what policies have been in other countries and involving other ethnic and racial groups, such as I mentioned, Malaysia and Fiji, India. Very different. The U.S. is not involved in any of these policies, I should say. And then it ends with the economic development of nations. As I said, it's pretty short. It goes through the economics development of nations. A lot of it has to do with actually the effect of geography. It's not just natural resources available, but can you move information can you move goods around? So do you have navigable rivers or good ports? What are the elevation changes? So very mountainous regions tend to have a difficulty of transporting things around compared to river valley areas where you can go up and down if it's a navigable river. Anyway, it's some interesting stuff. It gives you perspective on aspects that, again, if you're very U.S. centric, very now centric, you may not realize. And I think having these examples from countries that maybe you don't know very well, and definitely from hundreds of years ago, where you probably don't know that specific history very well, gives you a perspective because you don't have a current dog in that fight, as it were. This is one of my arguments I've had for reading stuff like Suetonius's 12 Caesars book. I'm not emotionally head up as to whether Augustus was killed by Livia or not, or Claudius, who almost definitely was murdered by his wife, and then their aspects of policy and culture and laws and all of that. That's thousands of years in the past. I can look at it at a distance and think about how successful or not successful, or what the subsequent results were. In a lot of these cases, these cultures are long gone. And so it can be informative if you can have some amount of distance, don't have preconceptions of how it's supposed to be. You can get very hung up in that if you're in the now, if you're in the here and now. You do have to be in the here and now for stuff. But if you want to be able to analyze a situation, you have to be able to do it dispassionately, because too many times people will get emotional and get upset that there is an optional policy, optional explanation, whatever, that they don't like, and will not entertain. Okay, fine. Then you've blocked that off. That might mean you might miss things that are the actual explanation or the optimal policy for whatever your goal is, just so because it happens to be that thing or adjacent to it, which I think is most often what occurs, is rather than entertain certain possibilities. And I'm not going to give examples because people will react to it, about current policy surrounding the pandemic. If you say, here's a possibility, and people really don't like it, well, if that possibility occurs, well, what are they going to do? Yes, I understand you don't like it. It may happen. Okay? Anyway, it's a good book. It's not that long. It's like 250 pages, I think. And it's not small type or anything. This is hardcover. There is a revised and expanded edition, but I looked at the table of contents, looked like the same stuff. It just was revised and expanded, it seemed like a few years later. So maybe in response to the financial crisis. I haven't looked at the revised and expanded version yet. If you get the old one, it's pretty good. And it's not really that dated. As I said, he tries to pick examples that span a wide range of times and places so that you can see how universal it is in applying to human society. Anyway, talk to you another time.